Hello, everybody, and welcome to 30 on 30, 1994 edition. We are in the third episode, and today we are talking Interview with the Vampire. And here to talk about this great movie with me is a good friend of mine, Mr. Bradley Colin Smith. Hello, Colin.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very good. I was excited to rewatch this film. It's a film I love and hadn't actually watched in a while, so it was nice to revisit it.
Yes, definitely. When I first told you about this series, this was one of the ones you wanted to do, and since I've been meaning to do another video with you, I thought, yeah, let's do Interview with the Vampire. Have a good chat with Colin about it.
Yeah, I'm excited. The series adaptation, which was very different, came out a year or so ago, and so
Yes,
I
I heard about that.
was watching that, and it's been a while since I've gone back to this movie, so it was kind of nice to see this take. Very different approach to the material. I'm also a super fan of the original novel. I read it in college and fell in love with it, and ended up reading most of the series and a lot of Anne Rice stuff. So I was very excited for the movie and for the series eventually. But it's again, each one very different in how they approach the story. But there's things I like about each one and how they tell the story.
Definitely. So because you've read the book and seen the movie, would you say this is a good adaptation?
So my approach to adaptations is that it doesn't necessarily need to be, for me, it doesn't necessarily need to be the same, right? Like
No.
I'm perfectly happy to see, film and books are different media. TV
Yes.
and movies and books are all different styles of telling stories, and they each have their strengths and weaknesses, and things that work really well in one medium might not work as well in one of the others, right? And
No.
so for me, I don't feel like for it to be a good adaptation that it has to be exactly the same. I think it has to be true to the heart of the story and the
Yes.
themes that are being told, depictions of characters. But again, I'm fine with them being flexible about how those characters appear, or maybe how some of the plot details work out. I do feel like the film. I mean, I love the story. I think the idea behind it is great, and then the themes that run through it and the characters within it. I just love the story of the first book, especially Interview with the Vampire, and um, I feel like the film did what it could to really capture all of that. I feel like it's very true to the spirit of the story. I mean, my understanding is Anne Rice was quite involved in the development of the script. Um,
Yes.
and yes, it makes some changes, and it certainly changes a number of the characters. Many of the characters are very different than how they appear in the book, but I feel like the heart of the story and the spirit of the characters is there within this telling, and it's a broad, sweeping, centuries long story. So I was really impressed from the first time I saw it till rewatching it again just today, how well they tell the story in this film. And so for me, yes, I'd say it's a good adaptation. Is it direct? Not necessarily. There's a bunch of things that are different, but there's a lot that's the same as well. Certainly a lot more than what the series did. What I appreciate about the series is that it kind of reinvents the story in many new and different, interesting ways, and I love that as well. But the film, I think, is closer to the novel than the series is.
Yeah, okay. Because I was reading, I've got the Wikipedia page in front of me, and it did say on the credits that Anne Rice wrote the screenplay to this too.
Yes, I think, like I said, I think she was very involved. I know there was some controversy originally about the casting of Tom Cruise, and we'll get into some of the casting stuff in a minute. But I know that she eventually came around and was quite happy with his performance. At first, I think she felt like he wasn't the right fit, but then once she saw his performance, I think she ended up endorsing it. So, and again, I have to remark, like, this is one of my favorite of his performances. It's so off brand for him. I
Yes,
think it was a bold choice for him to make.
definitely.
And because he had a very specific brand through the 80s and into the early 90s. And
Yes,
then he really branched out. This was the start, I think, of him branching out and doing roles that were different, and eventually, into
yes,
the, Jerry Maguire's and some of the more the different kind of roles from. He's kind of slipped back into more of a predictable kind of role
yes.
for Tom Cruise again now in this age, but this was a period where he really began experimenting, and I think he's great in this movie. I think he makes a great Lestat.
Yes, he is good, but I think because it's obviously modern day, and if you watch it now, his character, his look kind of comes off a bit goofy. But at the same time, I kind of appreciate him because I think Tom Cruise is better when he does non-action films, and like he's gotten to a phase now where he doesn't like doing those kind of movies. But when you look back at the movies he's done on action, he actually shows his acting range, and he's not a bad actor at all.
Yeah, not at all. I thought he really pulled off a character that's very different than how he normally appears on screen, and so I always appreciate that with when I see actors take those kind of risks and chances. And he, for many reasons, he was a weird pick
Yes.
for this role, but it's one of those ones that maybe like Michael Keaton in Batman, or other like famously sort of uh, uh, actors that were cast in roles that people reacted very badly to the original casting, but ended up sort of creating an iconic uh, role anyways, and a performance that sort of lives on, right? And I think he really
Yes,
accomplishes that.
he does.
I definitely think the actor whose name I'm forgetting right now, who's playing Lestat in the series, is much more
Sam Reed.
Sam Reed, thank you. Yeah, and he's excellent in the series, and I think he does a very good. And as much as the series varies from the novel a little bit more, the his Lestat feels much more like what I imagined in my head the first time when I was reading
I can
the book.
imagine.
Yeah, he's much more of a classic idea of Lestat than Tom Cruise is. But as I said, I still love this performance. I watched it, just again today, and was really taken aback. I it's interesting because Lestat has become the iconic character from this series, but in reality, he's a supporting character in this story. Louis is
Yeah.
really the center of this story, and Lestat becomes the central character of the whole sort of Vampire Chronicles. But
Yes.
here he is a supporting role, and to see Tom Cruise take that, and I mean, he's not in maybe not half, maybe a third of the movie he's not in, which is, again, for somebody of Tom Cruise's star power, is a weird choice for him to make, right?
Yes, definitely, definitely. Because my favorite performance in this movie, and because he reminds me of like the cool vampire, it's Brad Pitt.
Okay.
Yes, Brad Pitt is one of my all-time favorite actors.
I love Brad Pitt too. I think again, he wasn't. I'm trying to remember. It was so long ago now, but he was still building his own
Yes,
stardom at the time. He wasn't the big star yet, right? I
no,
think when this came out. So this was
no. I
probably,
think Tom Cruise was, and they just needed
yeah,
another man of Cruise's caliber
right.
to be alongside him for this film. So Brad Pitt kind of was the guy.
Yeah. And I think Louis is a challenging role because he
Yes,
is you know, miserable. So for so much of the story, and that can be hard to do in a way that doesn't become tedious, or but I mean, it has so much to do with the point of the story, and the different
yeah,
their different perspectives, and the way they come in conflict with each other, is pulling that off is a challenge. And again, I think the cast of the series is also amazing, and they're doing a great job with taking on these characters and their
yes.
relationships. But this Yeah, I think again, Louis is the heart of this story,
He
and
is.
he's the center of it. He's the vampire that they're talking about in the title, right? He's the one being
Yes.
interviewed, and he's looking for his I used to think he was looking for redemption. I'm not sure he's looking for redemption anymore. I think more he's looking for just getting some kind of peace with the choices that he's made and with his life.
Yeah.
And so I think Brad Pitt manages to personify that and bring us that perspective, which is again very different than Lestat, who wants to embrace who he is, a lot more vigorously.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Another who I personally think steals the show in this is Kirsten Dunst.
Yeah, Kirsten Dunst is amazing in this too. I am, and she's again, a hard role to pull off and a hard role to put on film. Like I remember when I was reading the novel, and they imagining casting that, because the idea of someone in a child's body, but a killer vampire, someone who's
Yeah.
emotionally
Which
growing up, but
reminds me of one of my other favourite vampire films, Let the Right One In.
yes, yeah, they are very much so. I imagine there must have been some kind of inspiration from these stories for that, because that is another amazing movie. I love that movie too.
Yes.
But yeah, Claudia is an amazing character, and one that is difficult and challenging and problematic in so many ways. And Kirsten Dunst does such a great job as such a young actor to take on such a weighty role. I think she does a great job. I don't know if you know this, but Anne Rice had a young daughter that passed away young from illness, and she spoke of her being the inspiration for the Claudia character, or the story at least around her. I mean, it is such a tragic story here in the fiction of the novel and the movie.
Yes.
And so it is always very I forgot how weighty when I was watching the movie again. Like, it is there's so much darkness and so much pain and so much cruelty um, and Louis surviving through so much trauma, right? So I'd
Yeah.
forgotten in a way how much there is in this story.
Yeah, definitely, because she's kind of the heart and soul of the movie, as well as Louis.
Yeah, she's such an interesting character and complicated, right? Like,
Yeah.
in some ways you sympathize her, in some ways she angers you so much. And I love that the characters, because I mean, all of them, like Lestat is not a villain per se. He has some kind of villain-esque qualities
Yeah.
to him,
Yeah. Just,
so
yeah.
yeah. um none of the characters are heroes or villains, right? Like, well, maybe Santiago, the Stephen Ray character, is a pretty villain. There's little redeeming about him, but most of the rest of the characters do horrible things and do noble things. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of mix in there through most of the main characters. So I think that's maybe one of the things that drew me
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
this story. It's so real, because that's how human beings are, right? We all do bad things and good things, and
Yeah.
try to be good, but often don't live up to that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. We're all human. And yeah, I think this film kind of has a few existentialisms, themes in it that help it really relate to and keep you engaged in the story.
Well, I think that, I mean, the book itself, I think, is revolutionary in a lot of ways, because up to this point, vampires had always been portrayed in cinema, in popular culture, just generally, as, personifications of evil, often, you know, uh, coded with sexuality and sort of, often as a, like a symbol for the evils of sexuality, right? And this was the first real story that challenged that and tried to tell the story from their point of view and what it must be like. The ideas of either being monsters or being these like powerful gods that we wanted, if I could live forever or whatever, and challenging all of that and throwing all of that away and showing them as flawed humans, ironically, that like I said, are both good and bad, and maybe make bad choices or sometimes make good choices, but also seeing the pain. I love how there's a discussion about, there's a point when Armin says, it's very few vampires have the stamina to live, very long. That they end up dying of their own choice because this idea of, we romanticize the idea of being immortal, but the reality is how painful it would be, right? And I love how he talks about
Yes, you're practically describing the plot of Al Conde at the moment.
Yes, yeah.
Throughout the whole film, he's like desperate to die.
Right. Well, we see that now more in, since the 70s when this book was written and published. We see that more now of us exploring it in a different way. And again, if vampires still represent a kind of dangerous sexuality, this book upends that by, and I think that's why so many, people saw themselves in their stories in this story, is because of the way that, sexuality has been villainized in culture, and then, sort of seeing a book that explores it in a way that tries to tell it from that point of view. So I think that, and this movie, again, being in the 90s movie, the series addresses that far more openly. This movie only sort of hints at the sexuality between the characters. It certainly is explicit in the romance. Louis and Lestat talk about loving each other. They talk about sort of being parents to Claudia, talk about his feelings for Armand. There's, they talk about the love aspects, but they sort of only hint at the sexuality aspect, which, like I said, the series being made now in this century is able to sort of explore that more explicitly.
Yeah. So in the original book, it's more like the series with the whole queer subtext and stuff.
Again, it's kind of hidden and suggested, but I think a little more blatantly than in the movie. The movie did sort of scale it back, even though I think it's still there. I don't think it's hard to see.
No, I didn't know.
In this movie.
No, when I watched, I thought, yeah, they kind of hint it a little bit.
Yeah, they don't completely erase it, but
they don't bury it under the rug at all.
No, but it's not, certainly there's not the explicitness that there is in the series. So it was the 90s. It was a different time.
Yes.
But, yeah. But all of the stuff around blood and infection, and like it's all sort of connected to sexuality and to STIs and all these ideas of sort of danger of and morality and all of that. I had forgotten that Thandie Newton was in this film until I saw her. Oh yeah, look, because again, before we really knew her as an audience, knew her well.
Yes. Was this also Banderas's breakout as well?
I think definitely in terms of American Western, English language films, I guess is what I would say. I think he was already a big star in the Spanish language world. I think he had done some Almodovar films.
Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down is one I've been meaning to check.
Right. So there was, I think the art house crowd knew him, but certainly mainstream audiences didn't yet.
Yeah, because I have seen him in Philadelphia, which was a year before this, but again, it's more of a minor role he plays.
Right, I'd forgotten that was before this, but yeah, so I think he was, I guess, starting to break out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now he's in everything.
Yeah. Yes. And this, it's interesting that, this film is 30 years old, and the stars of it are all still big stars. Like Tom Cruise is like had the biggest hit of the couple years ago. Brad Pitt is still a huge star. Antonio
Yeah.
Banderas, Kristen Dunst is still, quite successful in her career. Like there's, it's the cast is all
Stephen
still
Reed,
there,
the last thing I saw him in was a Netflix series called The Stranger.
right? I didn't see that, but I remember hearing about it.
And Christian Slater, he hasn't really done much since
Yeah,
Robot.
that's true. What has happened to him? I always liked him.
Yeah, he is a good actor.
He was a last minute replacement. I don't know if you'd heard that.
Yes,
River
I was
Phoenix.
literally just reading that. River Phoenix
Yeah,
was meant to be actually in the movie and
yeah,
passed away before filmmaking happened. So
yeah,
Christian Slater took his place and donated his whole salary to one of
yep.
his favorite charities.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. It's I remember that happening. And he unfortunately, I think just before they were start filming, he passed away, unfortunately. So, and his look was closer to how I imagined that character. But again, Antonio Banderas's character is supposed to be Italian and a teenager, like sort of, or a very young, like.
You could have got the little boy from Cinema Paradiso. He probably would have been
Not
older.
that young, not Claudia young, but he was supposed to be very young. So that was an interesting change. Again, it's not for me. It doesn't ruin the film. I think Antonio Banderas is amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
An Irishman playing a character called Santiago really fit
yeah,
well.
yeah. There's a lot of weird casting in this film, but it's like I said, it surprisingly works. The cast comes together pretty well, and yeah, it's surprisingly surprisingly different. Claudia is probably the closest to how I pictured her in the book of all of the actors. Probably Kristen Dunst is the closest. I mean, even she's a little bit older, I think, than the character was supposed to be. But I mean, again, filming that, the younger she gets, the more disturbing. Obviously, the series aged her up a little bit, so that they could do a little bit more with that, because it's one thing to read about that character, but to see it performed that way, I think would be really uncomfortable for most audiences. So.
Yeah. It was nominated for Best Original Score.
The score is great. The score is great. Who I'm now forgetting who did it.
Elliot Goldenthal, the one
Okay.
also scored Heat,
Right.
which has an amazing score.
Yeah. No, I do love the score in this film as well. But yeah, I'm amazed at how well they were able to capture the novel story, because again, they cut out certain plot lines, and a lot of that was superfluous anyways. I think they kept everything that was really necessary for the.
It lost to The Lion King.
Right. Well, and that makes sense. That's also an amazing score.
I know.
Yeah. Is that Hans Zimmer's first win, I wonder?
Yeah. First win.
Yeah.
And it was also nominated for production design, which I have to say is a character in itself, because because not only does it show San Francisco in its beauty, it also recreates this like historical fiction kind of setting that I really like.
Yeah. Yeah, the way they capture New Orleans is amazing. The Teatro de Vampiro is beautifully rendered. All of that stuff in the theater, right, is so disturbing. I find, like, I think as I watch it, as I get older, it becomes more disturbing to me. I think when I was younger watching it, I didn't necessarily understand all the ramifications of what was going on with some of that. And as I watch it now, I'm like, oh my God, what this is dark. Did you hear the story about Oprah Winfrey walking out of the screening?
No.
So she was to have Tom Cruise on to promote the movie, and she always watches the movies first, so they had a screening, and she walked out saying that she thought it was dark and evil. And she still had him on. She had him on the show, and they talked about that. But yeah, she thought the movie was evil and dark, and I mean, it's dealing with very dark themes, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know how far she got into it before she walked out, but yeah, she didn't watch at least half of it.
So she missed a really cool cover of Sympathy for the Devil,
Yeah,
performed
Guns
by
N'
Guns N'
Roses.
Roses.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, and so much of the like, I mean, if you don't get to the end, you miss so much of the point too. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Oh,
But I mean, it only got darker. So if she couldn't handle the first half, then the second half was going to be a lot worse for her, I think.
definitely. But on a good note, this won 2 BAFTAs.
Oh,
One
did it really?
one for production design and one we'll dive into right away. The
Okay.
cinematography. It won best cinematography.
Oh, okay. It is a gorgeous film.
It is.
Yeah. I remember the trailer and just the images from the trailer. I think I remember it starting with a scene of the horses and the horse-drawn carriage coming out of the fog.
Yeah.
And it's just like dramatic like that, like really like it's a gothic story, and Neil Jordan went for it with really making it operatic, really making it very theatrical, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's I think cinematography is a good choice for this film for sure. I think it is very beautiful to watch, even in the horror and the gore of it. It's it's a horror story, more less in terms of like fear, but more in terms of how unsettling, sort of the story is. There's a certain amount of horror in understanding that your existence depends on killing others, right? That is such an existential question to and has all kinds of interesting analogous real world themes to explore and to reflect on and think about.
Definitely.
But yeah, I think as I watch it as I get older, I find it more horrifying than I even did at the time. When I first saw it, when I was younger and far more immature, and maybe wasn't understanding as much of all of that as I have more now to think about. But
did you see this in cinemas?
I did, yes. So I did see this in cinemas, and I was excited for it. Like I said, I had friends.
11th, my mum would still have been pregnant with me.
Well, I was just out of high school, and just read the book, as I said. But so yeah, I had a number of friends who were big fans of the novel and were very excited for the movie version. So, but I was still pretty young at heart when I saw it. So again, I think I maybe didn't have the maturity to reflect on as much of it as I do now.
Yeah, definitely. But it did make a lot of money at the box office. The budget was
a big hit,
and the box office was 323.7 million.
I always was surprised that it never turned into a series. I know they did that one indirect sequel, and many years later, was completely really unrelated to the production whatsoever, and has its own. I mean, we could talk. That would be a whole other discussion to have, but we'll get into that here. But it was such a big hit, and the novels were popular. There was a whole series of them.
Yeah.
How they didn't start making the sequel right away when it was done is remarkable in many ways.
This was made at a good time because period dramas were getting popular, and so horror films. So mashing two together, they probably thought they could have loads of audience.
Right. Well, and maybe it was that it was hard to continue the story because the next novel in the series is actually more of a prequel. It's basically Lestat's story and goes, so it starts way back when, to his how he became a vampire, and then it sort of retells the events of this story, but from his point of view. So of course you get a very different version of events, right?
Okay.
And then it's not till the third book that the story sort of continues on, sort of, as much into the future. And so maybe they were struggling with how to sort of continue the story without, feeling like they were just going back and redoing some of the stuff. But who knows why it didn't happen? We can speculate all kinds of things.
A better idea would have been to combine the two together and make a Rashomon kind of film.
Well, it's kind of what they tried to do with Queen of the Damned. It just, wasn't very successful at doing it. But they did try to do a little bit of that with the Queen of the Damned movie. But in some ways, though, being the first book, like a lot of first books in series, it very much can stand on its own, and it doesn't need any further continuation or any further or backstory or anything else. So the fact that this movie exists as it does and does such a good job of adapting the book, I think is, good in itself, right? It doesn't necessarily not everything needs to be a franchise, right?
No, this is better as a one-off standalone movie for this. I mean, the new series you're watching, let that be like the big IP franchise. This should just stand on its own.
That's right. If the series remains successful, then you can go into the stories of the other books and take those characters off into the future. But for this movie, it exists for what it is, and it was a successful movie at the time. It captures the story of a novel that was also a cultural phenomenon, both sort of when it first came out, and then again later. I think it's the kind of book that gets a resurgence every few decades or so, right? As new audiences, new generations find it.
Yes.
So, yeah, because I think around the time that she passed away a few years ago, I think it also had a bit of a resurgence as well.
Yeah. But 7.5 out of 10 on IMDb.
Okay.
Rotten Tomatoes critics give it 63, and the audience give it an 86. So I can see this being more of a fan pleaser than a critical darling.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a divisive movie. I think I think the darkness of it is, and the fact that it embraces that darkness and tries to explore it is difficult for some people, right? So it's going to alienate some people. That's not for everybody, and I get that. And there are always fans of the source material who think, well, if it's not done exactly as the book was written, then it should, it's not good. So maybe there's a little faction of that too that's negative on it. Who knows? You're right. I think it was very popular. I think a lot of people saw it. I think it was divisive. It's one of those movies that I think was, some people came out of loving and other people came out of being like, eh. So it's definitely, I love divisive films, so I'm perfectly happy with films not being for everybody, right? Like there are some films that just everybody likes, but most of the time there's going to be people who it doesn't speak to for whatever reason, right? And that's fine too.
Definitely.
Because when you try to please everybody, you often end up not pleasing anybody, right? Like it's often said you dumb it down so that more people might appreciate it, and then the people who wanted that deeper dive might be disappointed. So sometimes it's just good to go ahead and make your vision. And again, I think they did a really good job of doing one adaptation of the novel, right? And now we can see there's you can do another adaptation that's equally good and different, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. I also saw in the series that Louis is played by Jacob Anderson, who I know from Game of Thrones.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and they change up the character quite significantly, and I think in ways that are really interesting and ways that really get to the heart of Louis as a character, and in fascinating ways that is very true to the character from the novel, but different, and very different from Brad Pitt's performance and portrayal of him.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of and he's great in it. Jacob Anderson's a wonderful Louis, and it's great to see that take on the character for sure.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned the production design. I wanted to jump back to that because I think the production design is one of those reasons why the film, I think the film holds up. Like, I think you can watch it with today's audience and can appreciate it, and it doesn't feel overly dated. In some ways, it's got 90s movie qualities to it, but being a period piece helps, right? But also, I think the production design is strong enough that modern audiences can watch it and enjoy it in ways that they're not pulled out by it being sort of an older looking film, if that makes sense.
Definitely, because there's when I did the last episode talking to Justin about Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, there were some kind of stuff that made it felt a bit outdated with the references.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and this movie does have being a period piece going for it, because period pieces do get to escape their time somewhat, right? There's still a certain amount of influence we see from the present day brought into those films, but I think good ones really stand the test of time, and like, again, if the production design really feels like it's capturing a historical era, it can look, there's a few of the special effects that maybe stand out because it was the 90s and it's not now, and our tastes have changed. Script wise, there's not a lot that felt out of place, like in terms, like sometimes you watch older movies and you're like, oh, we'd never say that now, right? Like, but this one doesn't, I don't remember there being anything in this
No,
one
I don't
like that. Yeah, but I think it still looks really good. The scenes with Christian Slater in that little room, I love that whole framing sequence. And it's just got such a great vibe to it and such a really neat feel to it that it holds up, I think, in a way that maybe some other films from that period might not.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why I got this. This is why I did this series. The main reason is because obviously I'm turning 30 in December. I wanted to look back at all these 1994 films that are now turning 30 with me.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great idea. And I mean, from the sounds of it, from some of the ones you're doing, it seems like it was a pretty good year for cinema. So it's great to go back and revisit that. So yeah. And did you ever look to see what film was number one when you were born? Did you ever do that? A lot of film nerds do that.
It was Dumb and Dumber.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Antonio Banderas was in that too.
What, Dumb and Dumber?
Sorry?
Dumb and Dumber.
Oh, maybe I misheard you. Sorry, what film was it?
Dumb and Dumber, the Jim Carrey.
Oh, Dumb and Dumber. No, I misheard you. I thought you said something else. Never mind. That's I've totally forgotten about that film. Jim Carrey was huge in 1994. Hey.
Yeah, 3 big movies. I spoke about one of them last time, and I plan to talk about the other 2.
All right, yeah. The film that was number one when I was born was The Godfather.
Nice.
Yeah. And also a really great year for cinema. Very different though, but again, a film that holds up, that feels like, again, period piece, but it has some 70s vibe to some of the costumes and some of the, but it very much feels like a timeless movie in a lot of ways, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. But I think Interview falls into that category too. I think that it looks like it could have been made more recently. It looks like I said, there's a few moments, very few. Louis killing Santiago felt a little the visual effects in that moment felt a little dated, but there was very few times when I felt like it didn't look very just really timeless.
Yeah, I get you.
Mm-hmm. The costuming's great. The makeup looks good. They, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's hard to. It is a gorgeous film, and and like I said, I just love the story. I love the conflict within the character, because the conflict is so much within the characters and their dynamics with each other. Right? There's the horror aspect. There's the stalking of the victims. There's the vampires coming after them in Paris. There's those kind of sequences, but most of the struggle and the conflict is within the characters themselves. All three of the main characters, Louis, Claudia, and Lestat, they're all conflicted, even though they approach it differently. Like Lestat could have very well been a one-note character where he was just, reveling in his vampireness, but they
Yeah.
don't make him like that. You can see he cares so much, even for Claudia. Like even the difficult relationship between him and Claudia, you can tell they still care for each other, and as much as they hate each other at the same time. And that's what I love, is the characters are so rich and complicated and difficult, right?
Yeah.
I do feel like some of the characters in the second half get maybe not as fleshed out as well. Like Armand, for example, and Santiago, and some of those, like there are, and I think her name is Madeline. I'm just checking. The woman that Claudia wants Louis to make as a companion for her. I mean, she really just shows up as a cameo in the film. In the book, she's developed more, so that her ending and her story is quite tragic as well. They imply it in the movie that she had a daughter who died, and so she's looking at Claudia to replace that for her. They get into that more in the novel, and I assume in the series we'll see more of that as well. But the movie had to cut corners, right? Like they didn't have time to tell all of it. And so Armand, especially, though, I think is the one that gets the least. His character gets cut down the most, and it's too bad, because he's a fascinating character too. In fact, one of the books is all his story, and he's way older than Lestat, right? And he goes back to ancient Rome, and so one of the books is called The Vampire Armand, and it just goes through his whole story from his like humanity all the way up to past this part of the story. And the movie only really hints at who he is, and they do that for a reason. They needed to focus on the characters they focused on, and I still think they handle him really well. They just there's just not as much of his story there.
Yeah. Yeah. See, it would be good to have I would say make that a completely separate movie to this if you're going to do that into a movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they had continued on with adapting the books, I think it would have felt more like an anthology series than a straight up, because it does, like the books go and they focus on one character, they focus on a different character, they tell different sides of the story, or they go into a whole other offshoot of different characters. So it would have felt more like maybe more like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Like going off and telling different character stories. But maybe the series, we'll see what the series ends up doing. Well, who knows?
Yes. Who knows?
But it's one of those movies that you go back and rewatch, and I enjoy every time I rewatch it, and I get new things out of it. And it's just one of those movies I'm glad exists, right? Like I get to go back and revisit it whenever I want.
Yes. So I should probably tell you how I got into this.
Yeah, please.
Movie. I borrowed it off a friend, and I kept meaning to watch it. And when I was like with my previous partner, she pointed out saying you need to watch it. It's a really good film. So I was like, yeah, let's watch it. and I surprisingly really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Did you know that at the time that it was from the year you were born?
I think I did. Yes, I think that's why I wanted to watch it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and were you familiar with any of the story or anything about it, or did you kind of go in relatively blind?
Relatively blind. I think the only thing I seen was that clip of Christian Slater drive off. I think while I was flicking through TV the once.
Right. It's a great way to end the story. I mean, it does hint at, even though like some people might look at it today, it's kind of has the feel of what today we would see in a post-credit scene, right? Even though that was kind of before post-credit scenes were really a thing.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's necessarily what it's doing. Like it feels like it's setting up a next chapter, but in some ways I don't think that's necessarily
I
what it's
personally
doing.
think it's setting up one final jump scare.
Yeah, well, there's that, but I also think it's more about saying, it's saying, it's giving Lestat, it's showing us that Lestat is enduring, right? Like
Yeah.
that he can't be like, yeah, Claudia, what she did to him really took him down, but didn't take him out. And I think that's what that is really saying. And again, like the story really wrestles with conflicting views of how to live this life. And it doesn't want, I think in some ways it prevents the film from taking a complete side, right? And allowing Lestat's, point of view to live on as well as Louis, right? So that's, yeah. I mean, in some ways you could look at it as setting up a sequel, Lestat's back and now he's going to come and get his revenge. But like I said, that's not what that scene is for me. It's something
Definitely.
more, yeah. And it's just a nice way to end the movie because it is such a and that's another thing about this story is that it could be very depressing, right?
Yeah.
And that last scene helps the movie end on a note of a little less bleak, right?
Yeah.
It's not a Bergman film. It's not Lars von Trier. It's got a lot of bleakness to it, but it is it's also got some joy and viva for passion for life, right? So
yeah
I like that aspect of it as
I
well.
like the aspect too.
Yeah it's because it also like it's one of those films that walks the line between being a crowd pleaser, because it ended up being popular, even though it's somewhat divisive. It still ended up being quite a financial success. And but also being an artsy film. Like Neil Jordan had just come off of making The Crying Game, which was
which I still need to see.
Yes, and that film doesn't hold up as well. I need to revisit it as well, but there's some issues with that film. But I mean, certainly it was a breakout art film that had sort of gone beyond the art houses and had started to get some mainstream attention. And he's wrestling with trying to make the kind of film he wants to make, but also trying to make a big budget studio film at the same time. And it's one of those films that walks that line, I think.
Was this like his first venture into those kind of movies?
That's a good question. I definitely think his filmography, I mean, I can pull it up here, was
I've always wanted to see Mona Lisa because I like Hoskins.
Yeah, and that's a great film. But again, very, very, on the sidelines, right? But then he gets into, he makes some bigger films, but then he kind of goes back to making artier films again. Like he had this brief flirtation with Hollywood, but another one of his films that I love, that I kind of in my head canon think of as part of the same universe, is Byzantium. Have you seen Byzantium?
Byzantium?
Yeah, with Saoirse Ronan and Gemma Arterton. I always say her name wrong. It's a vampire story about two vampires who have to, sort of continually move around as they get discovered in their, lives, and they pose as mother. Saoirse Ronan was pretty young when they made this, so I think she was a teenager.
I do like the look of the cast because it's British actors. I know are good at acting.
Yeah. It's a British film, I'm pretty sure. It came out of the UK for sure.
Yeah.
And I like to, in my head canon, I like to think it's set in the same universe as Interview with the Vampire. But he returns to some of these themes. It looks, again, gorgeous, the way that it looks and the way that it's filmed. Highly recommend it. I'm actually thinking about rewatching it now that I've just rewatched Interview. I'm thinking about revisiting Byzantium again too, just to.
I'll go on Letterboxd and add it to my watch list.
Yeah, you definitely. I would definitely. I don't know where it's available to watch, but I have. I think I have a digital copy I bought through iTunes. So, but I'm not sure where you can stream it. But hopefully somewhere.
Nice.
Just look up. Well, yeah, I don't know if you guys have Tubi. It's on there. I don't know if that's available in the UK, but anyways, I like that film a lot. Kind of very underrated, I think. It kind of went under the radar when it was released. Had kind of a limited release, but like I said, in my world, those vampires all live in the same reality.
Nice. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I'm glad you did enjoy it when you saw it. It's great. It's kind of revisiting films from different periods of time, right? Like we
Yes.
watch the films in our lifetime and we're influenced by the culture at the time when we see them, right? Like we're influenced by what's going on in pop culture, what's happening in our own lives and what the reaction is to things. But when you revisit films from before your time, you are coming at them from a different point of view, right? Like, when I watch Casablanca or I watch any period of time, sort of before my adult or even childhood viewing time,
Yeah.
you are now approaching it quite, and so many films get revisited and get a whole different life with new generations coming to find them, right? There's so many examples of films that were derided at the time of their release that have gone on to become, major considered classics, right? So
Yes. Yes. I mean, yeah, I do like the Oscars and I do like.
yeah.
But I do think, but looking back, they've missed out on all these films and are popular and beloved.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the fun thing about award shows is half the fun is talking about what they got wrong, right? Like,
Yeah.
the big discourse this year after the Oscar nominations came out was all about what didn't get nominated or who didn't get nominated for Barbie, right? So,
Yeah.
that's half the fun of these things is talking about why they're wrong. Like it's very rare. I always joke that there's been um there's been 4 times now in my lifetime when my favorite film of that year actually won the Oscar. And last year was one of them because I adored and still adore Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Same.
And it's very rare that the film I love wins, right? And so when it does, I celebrate. And one of those times was Moonlight, which of course, the Night Moonlight one was crazy because there was all of that, confusion over who really won. But, but yeah, no, it's very rare that happens for me, and it won't happen this year because my favorite of the crop of this year is Past Lives, and it's not going to win, unfortunately.
That is a great movie, though.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, I don't begrudge Oppenheimer. It's going to win, and it's a great film, so I don't want to begrudge that in any way. But yeah, we'll see what happens at the BAFTAs too, because they have quite a different lineup this year.
Yes. Yes, and it looks like the BAFTAs loved this movie more than the Oscars did.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's Anne Rice's work has been celebrated in Europe more than in the US often as well. But I did actually, the time I visited New Orleans, I pulled out my old copy of Interview with the Vampire, the one that I had originally bought back in college, and I read it while I was visiting New Orleans. I'd never been before. I walked down Royal Street and saw the building that she supposedly thought of as the inspiration for where Louis and Lestat lived during the course of this story. There's a specific address that she claims that you can go and see. So I looked at it, and it does look very much. I think the movie actually used the same location, so you can see that there. And I sat in the square and got my beignets and read chapters out of the book as I was sitting there in New Orleans, and it was a bit of a religious experience for me. But yeah, this story and this movie will always hold a special place in my heart, and I'm glad that new audiences are finding it too.
Definitely. Well, thank you for coming on and talking to me about this movie. I'm kind of glad that I've been having different guests on this series instead of the same old faces, and it's nice because obviously Cody had a lot of good things to say about Forrest Gump. Me and Justin kind of reminisced about an old Jim Carrey comedy, and me and you've kind of dived into this film and like the culture at the time and stuff, which has helped add to this series.
Yeah, well, and it's such diverse films, right? Those are like all legendary films and all very different, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on and letting me talk about this movie that I love.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, and I will probably have you back to talk another movie, and I'll have
That'd
to
be
do
great.
some. I'll have to get you on an episode with me and Justin one day.
That would be great. I would love that. Thanks so much.
It's all right. It's all right. And yes, thank you guys for watching me and Colin talk about Interview with a Vampire. If you want to see my episodes on Forrest Gump and Ace Ventura respectively, then go on to YouTube and search for them in my YouTube channel. Make sure you give this video a like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on Interview with a Vampire. I think the next one I'm planning to do is Pulp Fiction with my friend Chris, which is my favourite film from that year.
Great.
Yes. But Colin, thank you for coming along to talk about this movie, and I'll see you again next time.
Yep. See you soon.
Yeah, see you soon. Bye, everyone. Bye, Colin.
Bye.
Bye-bye.